Good evening, I'm Diana Bully, and welcome to Let's Talk Supportive Housing in Nanaimo, an online Q&A session for you to ask any questions that you may have about two supportive housing projects here in Nanaimo, and for our panelists to directly respond to those questions from the residents of Nanaimo and the community. This meeting style is a first for BC Housing, but the process tonight is simple. Just below on this page is where you can submit your question for our Q&A. And you can see that there are questions that have already been sent in and where we've answered some of them already. But don't worry if you haven't sent your question in yet. There's still time. You can type your question in below where it says, have your voice heard, and then click submit. Your question will be read out to our panel and answered directly to here on camera. They'll also be added to the questions online. Taking your questions tonight are our members of our panel who are going to introduce themselves. I'll start with Dominic Flanagan.
Thank you. My name is Dominic Flanagan, and I'm from BC Housing.
Great. Hello, my name is Dean Fortin. I'm here representing Pacifica Housing.
Hi, I'm Violet Hayes. I'm with Island Crisis Care Society.
Good evening, Heidi Hartman, BC Housing.
Lisa Murphy, I'm with Island Health, Mental Health Substance Use Services.
Good evening, my name is Dale Lindsay, and I'm here with City of Nanaimo.
And as well, we have Anna Kalfa from BC Housing, keeping an eye on the questions, and she'll be asking the questions of our panelists this evening. So before we get started with your questions, I'd like to turn it over to Dominic to see if he can tell us a little bit more about the supportive housing planned for here in Nanaimo.
Thank you. So it's important to put some of the challenges we're facing here in Nanaimo in context. As people may be aware, the homeless count in April of this year showed 335 people in this city of Nanaimo experiencing homelessness. So that means of that number, people are either sleeping on the street or residing at a shelter. So in response to that urgent need, BC Housing is partnering with the groups represented across in this room and opening up approximately 170 units of supportive housing across two sites. We're opening up 90 units at the Labio site, and the operator there will be Pacifica Housing. And we're opening approximately 80 units at the terminal site, and the operator there will be Island Crisis Care Society. It's important to note that this is temporary housing as we work closely with the City of Nanaimo and other partners to develop more permanent supportive and affordable housing here in the city.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to get started with the Q&A, and I'll turn it over to Anna. So what are we hearing so far, Anna?
Hi. So I'd like to start with a question, a recurring question that we've gotten a lot, and that question is about what supportive housing is exactly. What does that mean? What kind of supports are available?
Sure, great. So what kinds of supports are available? What is supportive housing? Dominic, is that something you'd like to start with?
I'll start, and I'm sure Dean and Violet can contribute as well.
Sure.
So supportive housing is basically affordable housing with supports. And those supports, and in this case, both sites will be have a high level of supports, and that includes staff being at the site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And those supports are vital to make sure people maintain their housing and get connected to the right level of support services.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important to highlight, first of all, that it is housing in the sense that these are people's homes. And the intention is for them to build that sense of ownership and that sense of community. We fundamentally begin with food, shelter, clothing. These are things that we need, that we know that homeless people need to access. So they have a safe place to live. There is going to be food on site. And then further, there will be counselors available, support staff available to help hook them up with mental health services if that's necessary, health services, which is a huge need. And further, to start to work on integrating them back into and welcoming the community, whether it be through work programs, volunteer programs, other activities like that. It's really client-centered in the sense that it's driven by the individuals that are there working with the workers that are part of them, but recognizing that fundamentally starting with housing, starting with a safe place, starting with that food, starting with some basic necessities being taken care of, that sets everybody up for success.
Great. Yeah, anything to add, Violet?
Just a little bit, just that the staff really come alongside and they become that support, as Dean said. And so many times if someone's struggling with anxiety or something in the middle of the night, it's really nice to be able to come down and just say, hey, like I'm really struggling with this, and someone to sit down, have a cup of tea with, and just really build that therapeutic community. And then we see that the people really have that belief in themselves that they can move forward and grow. So yeah, we're very excited about it.
Thank you. Great. So that's a great overview, I think, of supportive housing and what kinds of services are offered. What are some of the other things that you're hearing about online?
So we are starting to get some live questions in, and we also had a lot of advanced questions over the last week as we let the community know this event was happening. One recurring question is, why wasn't there more public consultation before the decision was made to build those sites? So I thought maybe that's something that we could answer. That's another question that also just came in.
So just questions about maybe a lack of consultation leading up to the housing.
Yes, and we've heard about this question a lot, about the lack of public consultation. So I think it's really important to say at the outset, as I commented at the start, that there's a really urgent need here. It's really important that we get this housing open at the end of November, early December, so people can move off the street and into the housing, because that's also, we're really conscious that we want people to move inside before the winter really sets in as well, because it's by moving into housing that people's lives can be really turned around. It's also important to say that this housing will be temporary as well. So for example, at the terminal site, what will happen there is that any permanent housing at that site will have to go through a formal zoning and development process with the city in Nanaimo. And we will work collaboratively both with the city and the wider community as part of that process.
Great. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so we have a question about vetting residents and how that vetting process happens.
Great. Okay. So Heidi, is that something that you would like to speak to?
I'm happy to answer that question. So there is a very thorough process done, all to determine who will be moving into the modular housing sites. All the applicants completed a supportive housing application. There was a community lens attached to that. So agencies like Island Health, our outreach providers, the housing providers who are with us tonight, reviewed each and every one of those applications, determining who was the most vulnerable. Just going back to Dominic's point about the weather and it being so cold, we want to make sure our most vulnerable citizens are housed. We also consider the needs of the folks that are moving in, because we want to create a healthy community within the housing.
Thanks. You wanted to add to that, Don?
I just also wanted to add that a key part of this housing is also linked to the tent city down by the port, because that tent city is closing at the end of November. And if we don't have that housing, there's a great risk that the people who are homeless at that tent city will move into the downtown areas of Nanaimo or across the parks. So it's really important, as part of that safe closure of the tent city, we have safe, supportive housing for people to move into.
Thanks. Okay.
So now we'll turn to this would be a question, I think, for perhaps the city of Nanaimo. The question is, other cities have started tiny home villages to provide temporary housing for people along with other health and employment services. This gives people a safe spot to just be while they are getting their life on track to care for themselves. Has Nanaimo considered this?
I would start by saying there's no specific applications that we have at this time for tiny homes. But I would say part of the larger answer is that the city has made a real conscious effort over the past number of years of actually reducing barriers to innovative forms of housing. So there's been everything from the city a number of years ago legalized secondary suites to allowing duplexes on many properties as of right. And a number of years ago, we had a minimum size for dwellings in the community, and that's been removed. So In answer to that specific question, yes, someone could come in, make an application. We have a number of properties that are zone multifamily in the city. It would just be a matter of submitting an application to use the existing zoning to create a small unit development, but certainly permitted within our bylaws, yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I have a question about the homeless survey, the homeless count I believe they're referring to that was done earlier this year. The question is who conducted that homeless count?
Okay. Who would be the best person to respond to that question?
So,
Dominic.
That question.
Great.
So, the homeless count is available online. I would want to emphasize that. So all the information, including who conducted it, which was a local group led and community partners led by, but particularly the John Howard Society were involved. And the count itself is what we call a point-in-time count. So that means it was a point-in-time count over a 24-hour period, and it counts people who are in shelters and people who are living on the street. And I think it's also important to say that point-in-time counts, which are done in many communities across Canada, point-in-time counts are often seen as an undercount because they don't often capture people who are what's called hidden homeless, who may be couch surfing and have only a transient address. So it's that 305 number is a large number, but it also needs to be recognized that might actually be an undercount. The number of homeless people in Nanaimo is most likely larger.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you.
Okay, so I'll turn to a health question, and this question is about drug users, and if some of the tenants have addiction problems, will they be getting any kind of support?
Great. So Lisa, can we turn that over to you?
Yeah, so probably look to Dean and Violet for that on-site support as well, but what we know and have certainly learned over the years is that people in a safe, supportive environment are often at a good opportunity to look at the things that are causing them challenges, substances being one of them. Really, as Violet described, that on-site support, someone to come alongside, offer options, offer choices, and then maybe call on an outreach worker, drop-in services, even detox, all of that sort of comes together for people. It's very difficult to consistently offer substance use recovery services to someone who's homeless, hard to find them, hard to reach out, hard to have the consistency and structure that really supports people. So it's always a partnership with the client, and this would be a partnership with the service providers. And we share some of those services already in Nanaimo.
That's great. And Violet, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I want to say that one thing that's really good about this housing that's going to be offered is the partnership with Island Health. And so we're really happy that they're actually going to be on site 7 days a week. And so that's really positive because those conversations, as our staff get to know the residents and then come alongside, they'll be able to even just take them down to the office that's going to be on the site. So that's really encouraging.
Great, thanks. And Dean?
Well, and what I wanted to add was two interesting pieces that we heard today, and heard this week through part of our consultation, was an understanding that not all addicts are homeless and not all homeless are addicts. In fact, I believe that the point-in-time count here in Nanaimo identified, and it was a self-identified survey, we certainly recognize that. But the number reporting illicit drug use was about 25%. We've seen other homeless counts where it's about 40%. But it still gives an understanding that somewhere between 60 and 75% of the people within the housing that we're dealing with. Challenges are more, well, everybody's challenged by poverty, there's no doubt about that, and then the life skills to be able to successfully navigate. But there's more of the challenges around some of the mental challenges that might be there. There might be head injuries, there may be some grief and loss that are interfering with their ability to move on. So I didn't want to start with that big painting picture that everybody coming into our housing will be active or serious users. For those that are, and we're not going to say there aren't any, I mean, we are providing what we call as housing first, that we don't require people to be alcohol-free or drug-free when they come in. In fact, as noted, that we know when they do come in that there is an opportunity that their use decreases if they're using, and then there's that opportunity as they get in a healthy situation that they can move forward. And that's part of what the support workers do. How do we connect them with mental health services? How do we connect them with addiction services that allows them to move forward? So those services are in place. Again, it is client-centered. When they're ready, we're there to help move them forward. But we recognize that just by providing housing, we minimize or we lower the drug use if they're using it all.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Next question.
So we have a question about public safety. What will you do to try to prevent issues like trespassing, littering, and public drug use once these sites are open?
So maybe I'll turn that over to both of the housing operators as well, because you'll be responsible for managing the building and the surrounding area.
Sure. Well, that's something we will take very seriously, and there will be a committee that's going to be put together with us, BC Housing, probably RCMP, and most importantly, the neighbours in the community. So we want to be able to ensure that it is a safe environment, and our residents will be invited to be part of a clean team that's going to go around and support. So they will be picking up garbage and just really trying to keep their neighbourhood clean, because it's recognised that it's going to be their neighbourhood as well. And have you got anything to add to that, Dean?
Well, I mean, a couple pieces. I mean, recognizing that some of the concerns around public drug use, first of all, it's there already, so we recognize that it's something that's in the community and all our communities all over. With us, we recognize that the individuals now have a place to if they choose to use, it's in their own home. They don't need to be out in the public to do this. I'm not saying that it's always going to be perfect, but as you identified, we have what's called work experience teams, where individuals have the opportunity working with the outreach workers, working with the workers in the housing, to be able to go out and help do that clean team stuff and contribute to the neighborhood and community. Again, we're not there to solve all the problems of the community, but it's part of being integrated in the community and developing that sense of community care.
Great, thanks. Dominic, you wanted to add to that?
I think just to add, and to build on what Violet and Dean was saying, is that it's, again, to put this into context, BC Housing is over quite a long time period of many years now, developed over 10,000 units of supportive housing across the province that provide supportive housing for people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. And we started to take a deeper dive now about community impact of that supportive housing. And this is available on our website. It's called the Community Acceptance Series. And what we looked at was 5 communities such as Nanaimo, Kelowna, Victoria, Vancouver, and Surrey. And we had that deeper dive, and what we saw was some of the same concerns being expressed around issues of personal safety, community safety, crime, proximity to school. And what happens, although those concerns were addressed before the housing opened, in the communities that we looked at, we saw that those concerns actually diminished. And now those communities do really accept that housing and actively participate as part of the community. And those housing programs are really integrated into those communities as well. So I think it's important to say that those community concerns we hear are similar to others, and we are really working on ways to work with the communities through processes such as the Community Advisory Committee that we just heard about.
Great, thanks. Okay.
Okay, so a question that just came in is, why is it that the residents of Cranberry area had the city back out of its plan to put the temporary housing there by their protesting, and yet now the neighbors of both these sites have to live with it without being listened to? Why not ask Nanaimo residents to suggest sites where it would be more appropriate and allow them to be part of the solution? You may be surprised at what working with people before making decisions may bring to the table and give them a sense of being involved.
Okay. So who would be the best person to talk about the Cranberry site? We'll start with that part of the question. So there was a site selected, I imagine, earlier, and...
As like this is going back, I guess, over a year ago now. So people don't know the Cranberry site, a little bit different. The Cranberry site was a piece of property that was a city-owned, and it was pre-zoned for supportive housing, and it was identified at that time as a potential location for a development. There was some engagement with the community at that time about, again, this was a permanent building that was to be built on the site, so a little bit different than the context we're talking about here today with temporary housing. But ultimately, at the end of that engagement, the council of the day decided not to proceed with that project. But I think more importantly, on moving forward in this idea of community engagement and input, and what we're hearing this commitment from is when we come again to do permanent housing, we're going to need to identify sites, and we're going to need to work with the community to identify where sites are going to be for permanent housing.
Great. Thanks. Great. Okay.
Okay, so we have a question about benchmarks for success. The question, and I've been asked by the user to ask the question in its entirety. So besides creating and maintaining our employment, what will be the benchmark for success? Will these benchmarks be publicly available, and when?
So the benchmarks, essentially the question is, how are we measuring success in these buildings?
Exactly.
In these programs? Okay, and are those criteria going to be made publicly available? Heidi, sure.
I'm happy to answer that. So that's a great question, and it's actually something that we embed in the agreement with our partners. Stability is really key. We're taking folks that we've heard today that have had challenges and haven't been able to always stay in their housing. The goal will be to stabilize folks, to connect them to resources, and ensure that they stay in their housing. What we do is on a regular basis, the nonprofit operator actually reports out the tenancy and the stability on a regular basis. On an annual basis, BC Housing will report that out, the stability of people staying 6 months and 12 months. So obviously, success is folks staying housed, also looking at opportunities for folks that once they stabilize in the supportive housing, that there's opportunities for them to move on. They may not need those supports anymore, so can they move into market housing with rent supplements?
Thanks.
And I think if I can add, part of what we do as our process is we want to make sure that we're delivering our promise to the tenants, to the clients. On an annual basis, we do an assessment and survey, and we report that out as an annual report card. And it's actually quite amazing to watch, how greater access to health services, how greater access to mental health services, connection to community, looking at 30 to 40% of people now engaged in work and in volunteer. I mean, we measure all those things because it's about, are we helping our clients to get better in how they define that? But we measure those things, and we report that out on a regular basis and call it our annual report card. So it's something that, that holds us accountable both to the community, to the funders, but probably most importantly to the individuals that reside in our housing.
Great.
I just want to also add to that. So this is the formal how you measure success of housing, but it's also the informal as well. And I think that's where things like the Community Advisory Council and ongoing dialogue with the community. So there's that kind of feedback loop. So we know what's working, and we know where there may be challenges that need to be addressed. And so it's important that we have both those structured, what's working and what's being effective, but that day-to-day, okay, what's working on the ground as well. That's what we want to hear about.
Great. Thanks.
I'd also like to add to let our viewers know that we've just released some studies on social and economic value of supportive and affordable housing in BC. The condensed 4-page report of that is on the Let's Talk Housing BC site under our document library, and I encourage everyone who's interested in learning more to download that. And now I'll move to our next question. And I will say we are getting a lot of live questions coming in, which is great. So if I'm not getting to them as quickly as you'd like, I apologize in advance. So we have a question about Beban Park. And the question is, why choose a site so close to Beban Park, Nanaimo's busiest park with several children's activities going on?
Sure. Who would like to speak to the site selection, or in this case, Bevan Park?
Given that's the city property, it's probably best that I start anyways. And,
Sure.
and I think it's important when I answer this question to kind of set it in the context of what's been going on in the city in the last few months. And of course, a big part of that's our tent city. And as we moved closer to the closure of tent city, it became important for the city to recognize that we needed to find places for people to go. Because our realities before tent city and what we were concerned about after the close was that, I think as mentioned earlier, people were going to be moving back into the downtown or into our parks. And so our parks were already under a significant amount of strain from people living in the parks throughout the community. It's not what was maybe a downtown issue a few years ago has really become an issue that covers our entire community right now. And if people don't know, there are court decisions that allow people to camp in parks overnight. So all parks are generally open for camping. So the city wanted to make sure that we didn't end up in a situation where we're just basically pushing people out of tent city back into this context where we have these sort of social disorder problems in our park system overall, and that was a priority here. Why this property that was identified on Labio is, first of all, the city was asked to come to the table with lands for one of these sites. The city, first of all, we're not a land-rich community. We don't have a lot of land or a lot of properties to bring forward, but we wanted to make sure that what we did offer wasn't going to limit our ability in the short term to allow for development of land. So we want to make sure that we keep what limited lands we do have for development ready and available for housing, and look at only putting temporary housing in a location where we didn't see developing those properties in the near future. So in terms of the Labio site, it's part of our public works yard. It is an area that was used, although it's an area that we were able to accommodate a lot of those functions onto the main yard, allowing for temporary housing. This is not a location that will be available for long-term permanent housing. We definitely need those lands for the long-term operation of the city. But in the short term, they are lands that we thought we could make available.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, a couple of questions have come up in response to some of the topics we've covered. 2 questions about the litter cleanup. Someone's asked that we mentioned that there will be litter cleanups that will be daily. And so the question is, how many will be going around and how many blocks will they do? I'm not sure if we know that yet.
Sure. Well, why don't I start?
Specific answer that we have right now.
Okay.
We recognize that in the next coming week, we're moving in 80 or 90 people, Violet and ourselves, Pacifica. And as we move forward and we start to, and people get settled, we get ready, then that process starts.
Right.
So it's not going to start right away. And I mean,
Sure.
It's about integration in the community, about us getting people used to each other where they're living, again with the workers. But ultimately, that's really fundamentally important to us, is that we have that opportunity. And it's not, I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity to connect with the community and provide something back. But we recognize that fundamentally it's a great opportunity for individuals to start developing a sense of self-worth, to start relearning those skills. Great for the social worker, the support worker, to be working side by side and building that connection that allows for trust, to then start to develop and have those conversations about what's next in your life and how do we make you better if you so choose, and moving on. So those are important to us. I wanted to put that in context. It's
Sure.
not like we're going to have an 8-hour shift with 47 people out there, with a goal to clean up 20 tons of garbage. No. But it's being part of that community. So it's going to be organic, I guess is the way to put it.
Okay, thank you. Violet, did you want to add anything, or is that more or less cover it for you as well? Okay, great. Thanks.
So we have a question about how the residents will be paying rent. Just asking, on top of the housing and all of the supports that they receive, do they have to pay rent and how much? And do they still collect welfare or social assistance, I think would be the proper term.
Great. So who would like to answer that, whether or not tenants pay rent, and if so, how much?
Tenants will pay rent, and they'll be paying the income assistance rate of $375 a month.
And do they still receive social assistance?
Yes. So, but I think it's important to note, and Dean touched on this, so a couple of things. It's important to note that some of the tenants will actually be working, because we've heard from some of our outreach teams that BC Housing Funds, such as Pacifica and CMHA, that there's a number of people, for example, at the tent city are actually, they may be living at the tent city, but they're actually working as well. So those people who are on income assistance will be paying $375.
And I think we want to add to that as well. I mean, there'll be individuals who will be on veteran pensions.
True.
I mean, those are some of the people that make up our community. There will be seniors that people are getting, the OAP, the
Old
the
age
homeless
pension.
pot,
Yeah.
old age pension, right? These are people in our community that need our assistance. So again, it's challenged that it's just income assistance, which I don't think that's a problem. They're individuals that need assistance, and so that's where the rent is. But that's part of it.
And so I think that just speaks, and I think it's, we've touched on this, but I think it's always throughout these discussions that we remind ourselves that when we talk about people who are homeless, we're talking about people, they're not a homogenous group. They're as diverse as the people listening to this broadcast or in this room. There's a range of reasons, as Dean was mentioning, why people become homeless. It may often link to poverty. That's a foundation of why people become homeless. It's issues of lack of affordable rental. It may be a significant traumatic event in their lives. It may be unmet health needs, including mental health and addictions or physical health. But it's obviously often a combination of those factors, not just one factor why that causes people to fall into homelessness. And that's why this is housing with intensive supports, because those supports can address a lot of those challenges about why people become homeless. So about, yes, unmet health needs, but also helping people access employment, connect with family again, and go back to school.
Great. Thank you. Okay, what's our next question?
So now I'd like to actually turn to the very first question we received on the Let's Talk site when we launched it a little over a week ago. And this question is, how does housing that is not near grocery stores and is isolated help? Or housing that's not near transit surfaces, how does that help? Housing needs to have access to services such as counseling and peer support along with personal and professional development.
Great, okay. So perhaps either to Violet or to Dean, how are you addressing some of those challenges around transportation and access to stores and that sort of thing?
Well, we will be providing meals.
Okay.
So there'll be a breakfast and a dinner meal. And also we have outreach workers that will be working based at the site, and they will be able to help with those types of things, either providing transportation, and then also we will have lots of resources coming in. So I think that's very important as well, that it will be coming right into the site.
Great. Dean, anything to add there?
No,
That's
well done, Violet.
good summary. Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, are you ready for the next question?
Yeah, I have a question on how long do you expect the LeBeau Road site to be operating?
How long are we expecting that site?
I mean, a little bit. I mean, and as the provider, we understand that ultimately it's a 2 to 5 year process. That ultimately the commitment by BC Housing to rezoning, to going through the public discussion, identifying sites, getting housing built, that'll determine the actual time frame. But understanding, as has been highlighted already, that it's a temporary structure. The structures in themselves are temporary. Their lifespan is limited, as well as recognizing that the city needs those yards back within a time frame.
Okay.
We know that this is housing. We're working hard to make sure that it's seen that way with the neighborhood and the community and the people that live there. We also recognize that more permanent structure in the sense of solid bricks and mortar is also where we want to end up at the end of the day. So we have a commitment to make this happen sooner than later, but also ultimately the commitment is on behalf of BC Housing to work with the city, and that to a certain extent is a public process.
Maybe just to add to what Dean said, I mean, I think part of the answer of how long is in the answer of, well, how long will it take us to identify sites and work with the community, and then the recognition beyond that once sites are even identified and they've gone through their process, there's still that time to build those developments out and go through that permitting process. So, 2 to 5 years might sound like a long time, but in reality, to work our way through that entire process, it might be reflective of what time's required.
What's required, yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
So this is an easy segue to the next one, which is how long is Newcastle Place going to be temporary, and when is the site going to become permanent?
Great.
That is exactly the same answer as the last one, because yeah, BC Housing has committed, from my understanding, that they will go through the process. And so, yeah, however long it takes to find a location to move the people onto.
Great. Okay, thank you. And can we clarify that Newcastle is the name of the building?
Yes,
At
250 Terminal.
Great, thank you. That was I don't know that we've said that yet. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we had a question about the agreement that tenants sign, and what exactly does that agreement state, and how long is the term of tenancy?
Well, you want to start with that one, and we'll come to you, Dean?
Sure. So term of tenancy is however long it's that they want to be there, need to be there for. We have some residents that are in some of our supportive housing that after a few months, they're back on their feet, they're ready to move on, and then they're looking for housing with maybe a rent subsidy or something, and there are going to be some rent subsidies that are going to be coming alongside so that they'll have that opportunity to find market housing. For other residents, it could be that they're there indefinitely because they need that support. I think of one lady that we have with us who has a brain injury, and so she's not going to get better, but she's living a very successful life with us, a full life. And we've really seen her blossom as she's been in the supports, and she's a budding artist, and she does beautiful artwork and is living a very healthy, happy life. But like I say, we don't think that she's going to, at some point, move on. So, Dean.
Yeah, and I think I want to start by emphasizing and understanding that the individuals who are moving into these sites have applied for this housing. They want this housing, they want the permanent housing. And so we have people who are already motivated and committed to making it work. As they come in, so they will, it's to a certain extent, that's their homes. They live there as long as necessary and as long as they choose. And within that context, we have the program agreements, which is a commitment by them and by us that there's certain behaviors that we need to make sure, because safety of them as individuals, safety of our staff, safety of the community is important. And so there's certain behaviors and expectations that we highlight and work with them. And so that's part of what the program agreement sets out for us.
And I think it's important to mention that it is not the Residential Tenancy Act. It is a program agreement. They're signing and agreeing to come into a program. So I think that's very important to know.
Okay. And Heidi?
It's probably really important to also acknowledge they're agreeing to pay rent, and they have roles and responsibilities as does the landlord, and when they enter the suite and the programs they're looking at. So they get the behavior of guests. Those kind of things are really key parts to the program agreement as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
So we have a question about whether or not the clients are Nanaimo residents. What proof is required to claim that the clients are Nanaimo residents?
Okay. So who would like to answer that? What's required to ensure that the people that are coming to this housing are in fact from Nanaimo?
Well, the team that's been working with them currently to collect the applications, like Heidi, I think, mentioned earlier, someone did anyway, that they know these people. They've been working with them. We know many of the women because they've been in Samaritan House in the shelter. And so it's a team that has been working with these people for a long time, and they actually know them. So it's not like they're people just coming in from somewhere else. And yeah.
So they're familiar with them, and yes, Heidi.
And I can also add that we know from the point in time count results that of the 335 people, 81% or 83% were actually have been living in Nanaimo for over a year, and I think 63% over 5 years. So we know from the point in time count that there's a high number of Nanaimo residents that are homeless and have been here for some time.
And that's a really important point to emphasize, because again, we see that in other communities across BC, that when we talk about people who are homeless, they have been living in that community for a significant length of time. And also more than that, we're seeing a number of people who have been homeless for a long period of time as well, often for over a year. So that's called chronic homeless, and that proves a real challenge, because yes, people are being homeless for a long time, and the longer a person is homeless, often the more kind of complex their health needs are.
Right. Okay. Thank you. All right.
So I have a question for the City of Nanaimo. Has the city identified any sites that will be put forward to replace the LeBeau Road site at this time?
No, we have not gone through that final process of listing the lands. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the city has limited amounts of lands that we currently own. So if we're really talking about an aggressive move to identify lands, it may require acquiring property. So we'd be in the market like everyone else trying to identify those opportunities. But the short answer is no, not at this time.
Okay. All right.
So I have a question that's been asked twice now, and I guess it comes up with the legalization that's happened recently. Can each resident have a grow up in their taxpayer-funded room?
So the question is, could each resident?
Could I guess the question is, can residents grow marijuana in their suites?
No, I would say no.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, I mean, is there, ultimately, it is their unit, and they may drink water, and they may use, well, I was going to say you can use cannabis in there, but we have no smoking, so that's not going to happen generally. You know, so
Growing it.
I have a hard time understanding the question. I mean, in the sense that,
Yeah, whether or not there would be a grow up in the room perhaps is not.
yeah. I mean,
It's a very tiny room.
The very
It's very
small,
tiny
yes.
room.
Quite small as well.
80
So it'd
square
be,
feet.
and yes, it probably wouldn't be very conducive to be growing. So I think the quick answer is no.
it's not practical.
It's just not practical.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
I think we have a question that speaks to our housing continuum or spectrum of housing. What incentive is there when providing this type of supportive housing for a client to ever leave?
Okay. So what's in place to help a client or incentivize a client to move on once they've been living in supportive housing? And you mentioned the supportive housing, or the housing continuum. So I just want to make sure that anyone who responds gives a very brief overview of what that refers to.
Okay.
Who would like to
Well,
take that one?
I'll kick off a very brief comment. I think at BC Housing, there's a couple of things that we recognize, that we're talking about these 170 units of supportive housing, but we reckon more needs to be done here in the city of Nanaimo. And part of that, what more needs to be done, is we need more supportive housing, given the homeless crisis we're facing here in this city and across other communities in BC. But also we need more affordable rental. And that's why the province, through BC Housing, we are seeing an investment like we have never seen before in affordable rental housing. We're in the process of starting and rolling out that affordable rental. We're partnering with groups like the United Church of Canada, Nanaimo Affordable. So we're doing some great on-the-ground work to develop more affordable rental housing. So yes, we recognize that whole continuum of housing. So that is supportive housing for people who are homeless, and also affordable rentals, say, for low-income seniors, low-income families. I looked at my colleague Heidi, maybe some of the more local programs we've done around affordable rental.
Yes, so you mentioned the Mount Vincent project, the Nanaimo Affordable, the United Church project. Those are some current projects. I'm wondering if we should also go back to the continuum and why people would want to move on. Because I think it's also important for folks to know that these housing units, two people may be sharing a bathroom. People may want to move on. Once they stabilize and want independence, they'll want their own unit. They'll want to be able to provide their own meals, provide that independent feel. So I think it's really important to recognize the design of this very temporary housing may not be for everyone, and people will want to move on. We've got rent supplements. There's been a commitment of additional 50 rent supplements because affordability, Nanaimo is a very expensive place to live. BC Housing recognizes that there needs to be lots of different choices along the continuum, and some of those are using market units.
I just want to also touch on, we had a question before about how we measure effectiveness. And one of the areas that BC Housing, again, is taking a bit of a deeper dive when it comes to effectiveness of supportive housing is when people move on, where do they move on to? Is it to more independent housing? Is it into, and is that rental or is that social housing? So that's one of the key measures we are starting to look at. When people leave supportive housing, where actually do they move into next?
Okay, thank you.
And can I just add to
Yes.
that I think for us as providers, one of the most interesting things to watch and just really encouraging is when we see a person moving forward. You know, they may come to the shelter and then they come into a supportive housing, they move on into a rent subsidy, then eventually they get a job and then they move on and they don't need the rent subsidy. And that's really encouraging to see, and that does happen. I mean, so our goal is not to keep people in the same. We want to see them moving forward.
Thanks, and thank you for explaining that along the continuum, that it's that mixture of all the different types of housing options that make up a healthy community. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay, we have, I think, time for one more question before we go to a 10-minute break. So the question is, there's been a few questions around security. The most recent one is, will there be 24-hour security or personnel in the building on Terminal Avenue? And perhaps we could address both sites in answering this question.
So Dean, maybe I'll ask you first. Do you have a plan for security on site?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with an understanding of two things. First of all, at any given time, we will have a minimum of 3 to 4 people on. Obviously, during the day, there's cooks, there's janitors, people are moving in, there's night shifts, all those sort of things are there. We also have a guest protocol where guests are always signing in. We know who's in the building, how we're dealing with that, and then obviously residents are responsible for their guests. And we deal with that under the program agreement. We have internally, we have our own little security cameras so we can understand and see what's going on in those sort of issues. So, I mean, that's the ultimate for the site, that security stuff, that's important for us to know what's going on and what's going in and around our buildings, and that's important for us, for the safety of the residents and the safety of staff.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Dominic, you wanted to add to that?
So to add on to that, because it is, just to really echo that, this is housing with, as I said before, intensive supports like Dean's just highlighted. There will also be external security at the site, and that security will be there 24/7, and we will monitor the impact of that security, the effectiveness, particularly through the feedback, as I said before, of the Community Advisory Committee. So that security will be at the site 24/7. That's both sites, Labio and Terminal.
Okay, thanks. Violet, did you want to add anything around that, or is that it's covered off? Okay, perfect. So shall we look at taking about a 10-minute break, or?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We have a lot of questions. Take some time to just sort through them.
Okay.
We want to try and get to all the questions tonight. I do want to let all of our viewers know that if we don't get to your questions tonight, they will all be answered as soon as possible. And all the questions that are answered tonight will also be, all the answers will be posted on our live, on our Q&A here on Let's Talk Housing BC within the next day.
Great, thank you. So yes, we'll take a short 10-minute break, and we look forward to coming back and responding to more of your questions. So do feel free to keep typing them in there, and we look forward to getting back together again in 10 minutes. For joining us again on our Let's Talk Supportive Housing in Nanaimo. This is our live Q&A forum. I'm Diana Bully, and with me we have our panelists this evening. We have Dominic Flanagan with BC Housing, Dean Fortin from Pacifica Housing. We have Violet Hayes from ICC, Island Crisis Care Society, sorry. Heidi Hartman with BC Housing, Lisa Murphy from Island Health, and Dale Lindsay from the City of Nanaimo. So we're going to go back to starting with some of our questions and the responses from our panelists in just a moment. Anna, there have been some more questions coming in, and what's going to be the first thing we hear about?
Yes, we've had some questions come in. We've had a recent one about property values. The question is if property values are adversely affected by the 250 terminal site, what would the group do to top up losses? Beyond that, we have had questions, a lot of questions at our dialogue sessions as well we had 2 yesterday about whether or not supportive housing actually adversely affects property values.
Okay, great. So who would like to take on the question of whether or not property values are impacted by these programs?
I'll have a start at it. I think, so that's a really good question because as Anna alluded to, we get asked the question about property values and the impact of property values a lot in community meetings. And we've just in the process of finalizing a study looking at property values across the province and the impact of supportive housing may have on them. And we will post that link to this, the Let's Talk Housing site. So you'll be able to have a look at it for yourself. But what we did, we had quite a deep look at housing within a 200-meter and within a 500-meter radius of supportive and social housing. And what we saw at a kind of high level, we saw no decrease whatsoever. In fact, what we've seen throughout the communities we looked at is the property values have increased. And I just want to say, because one of the questions I get asked a lot, well, you're just looking at BC assessment values. We've actually looked at a range of criteria as well as BC assessment. We've looked at real estate data and other studies as well. So we're looking at a range of criteria, and as I say, we see no impact whatsoever on property values.
Okay, thank you. And we can look for that study on the Let's Talk Housing site, as Dominic said. So if you're interested in reading more about that, thank you. All right, Anna, what's next?
So we have a question about pets. There are some people that have pets that play an important role in their lives. Does having a pet create a barrier for entry to the temporary housing?
Okay. To our housing operators?
No, pets will be welcomed. We will have some limits because we can't have everyone having a pet, but definitely pets will be welcome.
Okay.
And I'm going to add to that because we all love pets as well. I mean, we're going to ensure that the pets are taken care of and that they're, you know, we care about animals are our friends. But also we fundamentally recognize like the benefits of pets. Now I'm going to sound like somebody from animal welfare, but the benefits of pets towards your mental health and recognizing, as we say, so many of these individuals have suffered loss, that may be the only friend they have. And I do, you know, love the t-shirt that says, you know, I want to be the kind of person my dog thinks I am. Ultimately, it's a recognition that pets are part of that therapy that we can allow and encourage. So, you know, within reason and dog size and cat size and all those sort of sizes of things, sure. We want to work with residents to help them succeed.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. The most recent question is, why are they moving forward with the 250 terminal site when there is a court challenge lawsuit filed in the BC Supreme Court?
Okay. So who would be best to answer this question?
So BC Housing, we're aware of that there has been a legal process started, and that is, we've consulted, and our legal advice at the moment is to still proceed. I go back to the point, irrespective of the legal process which is in place at the moment, we still have such an urgent need to address. And particular, you know, as someone who was out today walking around Nanaimo and getting cold and wet, I mean, can you imagine this kind of weather when you're living in a tent or living on a street? So it's really important that we bring people inside as soon as possible.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you.
There's a question about the gender balance for Newcastle housing. Will it be more men than women moving into the Newcastle housing? If so, how many?
Sure. Violet.
I actually haven't seen the numbers. They were working on them today, but I do believe that there are more women than men. I know we have one building that we have specified for women, and because we work with women at Samaritan House, that was very important to us because we recognize that some of the women are vulnerable. So yes, I'm pretty sure there's more women, but I don't know. By tomorrow we'll have it all figured out.
Okay, thank you.
I can add that there is actually a building of 22 units that will be for the women only. So we're really excited to have that opportunity because we did recognize through the outreach to the camp that there was a significant number of vulnerable women at one port place.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, we've had a number of questions about crime and whether or not crime rates go up in communities that are in proximity to these supportive housing buildings.
So who would like to ask or respond to the question about increasing crime rates around the buildings?
I'll start. I'm sure others can contribute though. So again, we touched on this in the first half when we talked about the community acceptance series we started to look at, and that did actually look at crime rates. I just want to, Dean mentioned that Pacifica operates a building program called Uplands here in Nanaimo, and we looked at reported crime there, and we actually did not see any increase in crime when reported crime when Uplands opened. So again, we hear that concern. I would encourage people to go and have a look at the data on the community acceptance series around these issues. But you know, again, it's about more than just data and those kind of issues. It's also about working within the community. And you've heard us say this often tonight, but it's around about that community advisory committee. A key partner there is the RCMP. I mean, we are working with the RCMP that each site will have an emphasized community liaison officer. So we really will be working, and the non-profits will be working with the RCMP, and we want people to feel safe. We all want to feel safe where we live, and most of all, we want people who are homeless to feel safe as well, because people who are homeless are often the victims of attack and violence as well. So it's very important that people who are homeless and move into housing, they feel safe as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Anything to add? Nope. All right. Let's carry on then. That's the next question.
We have a question regarding homeless people that don't live in the tent city. The homeless people in my neighborhood wouldn't live in the tent city. Why do the tent city people get priority?
Okay. Heidi, is that something that you would speak to, or?
Most definitely.
Thanks.
So we recognize that there is a crisis. We go back to the 335 at the point in time count in April. We recognize there is a significant housing challenge here in Nanaimo. We have to address what is a crisis at current, and that is the injunction date of November 30th. So we do need to prioritize those folks for our supportive housing sites. I think it's also really important to recognize that supportive housing is not the only type of housing that we need in Nanaimo. We need more family housing. We need more seniors housing. We're seeing a lot of seniors in the camp as well. So, you know, there's opportunity through the Building BC program to be able to, for nonprofits to be able to build seniors housing, family housing, Indigenous housing, or housing for women fleeing abuse. So we recognize there is a great need, and that there needs to be more housing in Nanaimo.
And you've referenced a program there. Is that something we could find more information about, perhaps on the website?
Most definitely
on the Let's Talk site?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And I think it was interesting. We had meeting, I think yesterday, and you know, someone said, "What are you doing for my homeless?" And it was wonderful to hear this individual express a concern for the people that she was seeing in her community and neighborhood,
Right.
not specifically. And I want to first of all say thank you for that compassion. We recognize that the tent city is the pressure, and we certainly through that vetting process we're putting people in, and how do we do the mix. But it's not exclusive. I mean, we're still going to, as people move in and move on, there's an opportunity for other people to move in. We also have, you know, our supportive housing and other people providing housing with supports. And so there's many ways for people who are homeless now for us to start to address. So certainly the two sites are focused on dealing with what's in tent city, but certainly all the other people in the homeless in this city are not being ignored either.
Thank you. Dominic.
I also want to echo that. You know, we've been working closely with the city bylaw and with the RCMP, and we have heard about other, if you like, small encampments of 2 to 5 tents in a park somewhere or on the edge of town, and we recognise, as we keep on saying, more needs to be done. And what we've done as part of our response in the last couple of months is enhance the outreach services through the Canadian Mental Health Association. So we're putting more people on the ground, and they will be able to kind of connect with people who are homeless in parks or sleeping in doorways. So we recognize as part of that more that needs to be done. We've increased the amount of outreach workers who can go into parks and connect with homeless people.
Okay, great. Thank you.
This leads to a question about the tent city. The question is how did we get into a position to allow the tent city to happen in the first place?
Dale, is that something you'd like to try?
I can start anyways.
Sure.
And if people don't know, tent city here in Nanaimo started about middle of May, and almost immediately the city took action and petitioned the court for a request to have the camp closed. That was heard, but the ultimate judgment on that didn't come down until almost 3 months later. So there was time for that tent city to become, I guess I'll use the word entrenched and grow. Ultimately, they had an original date that it was to be vacated by middle of October, and then there was actually a request for an amended interim order, and that was ultimately granted to get us to the date now of November 30th. But I would emphasize that the city has been working with partners at the site through those, I guess, almost now the last 6 months down there, but have been working actively since the very first day on attempting to deal with issues such as fire orders and general bylaw compliance on the property.
Okay. Does anyone else want to add to that? No. Okay. Thank you. What's the next question?
The next question we have is a public health question regarding needles and designated spots, safe injection sites, needle exchanges and such, and whether or not there's any measures that are being taken for that.
Lisa, is that something that you can respond to?
Yeah, I can probably offer some ideas there. So both the provision of safe, clean needles and the overdose prevention site that exists in Nanaimo are both part of the harm reduction strategy under the response to the opioid crisis. So certainly we would want to work with both Pacifica and Island Crisis Care to ensure that people are naloxone trained. I think they already are, to ensure that people are safe if they're using. And also, though, not to underestimate the value of having people known if they're using and able to reach out for support, because we know that that support is the first step in recovery. So whether it's naloxone, whether it's reaching out for treatment, whether it's access to primary care for anything from physical needs to opioid substitution therapy, like Suboxone, people have often heard of. So it's really about meeting people where they're at in a safe and welcoming way and then working through that. We know that overdose prevention sites have been a very effective strategy in helping people stay alive, and now we're learning about how to use those resources to help get people connected to treatment, because of course an overdose prevention site isn't the goal, it's the first stop. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that answers the question.
Okay, we've also had quite a number of questions on what criteria, if any, is there when locations are chosen for supportive housing sites, and how are they chosen?
Okay. So how are the supportive housing sites chosen?
Maybe from the city's perspective, what I can say is, and part of that answer is the same as when we look at any type of housing, and generally our official community plan directs us that we should be looking for higher density housing in our what we call our urban centers, or our core. So if you think of the community of Nanaimo, that would be sort of Woodgrove, the hospital area, downtown as our main centers. So if you're talking about a higher density development, and often these supportive housing projects are higher density, we tend to look in those areas or along our urban corridors. But we don't limit affordable housing to that. So there's this continuum, but there's also this spectrum of scale of affordable housing. So for example, the city just recently provided some land to Habitat for Humanity for a project that's outside of our urban centers, but again, that fits into the context of the community. So I think these projects fit where they have access, like all residents would have, to transit and services.
Okay, great. Anything to add for?
Just to really echo what was being said by Dale there, that you know, this is housing, and the people who will live there will need access to transport. They'll need access to social and recreational programs, etc. And so that's some of the criteria that BC Housing looks at as well.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, perhaps I can emphasize ultimately, like you said, it's housing.
Yeah.
These are individuals, and just as we would plan any apartment building or multiplex, it's a land use decision that you look at, saying what's good for all residents within the context of that land use. And I didn't want to think there's anything special about supportive housing. It's housing with supports.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. What's the next question?
Okay, we've actually had a couple of questions regarding the resident tenant selection process, and whether or not potential tenants will have criminal record checks, and if they'll still be allowed to live in the housing if they're on probation and such.
Okay. Who would like to take that question?
Well, we're not allowed to discriminate on basis of race, gender, religion, or criminal records. These are part of theirs. Obviously, if there's they can't. If there's probation that prohibits them from being in the housing, that's part part of working. Our goal will be, if there are issues like that, we need to work with probation officers. And again, it's about helping people succeed. I mean, people probably don't know, but again, people can do time. They can be discharged, and they're in a case where they need housing. We can successfully, that's part of the goal of is to successfully integrate people back into our community, however they come. So that's important for us. So long story short is no, criminal record's not going to be a barrier to housing. Being on probation isn't going to be a barrier. But we recognize that they've served their time, and the courts have put pieces in places, and we're going to help make that work.
And the mix of the people. As we mentioned, we've been working with the different outreach workers in a team, and knowing that they know these people, and we want to make sure that it's a good mix in the building. So we don't have all high needs, and we don't have all people that need very low support. We want to make sure that it's a good balance.
Okay, thank you. And Dominic.
And just to recognise that BC Housing has been doing some interesting work with BC Corrections Services as well, and we recognise that one of the significant feeder routes or pathways into homelessness is people being released from prison and having nowhere to go but the street or a shelter. And the huge difference in transforming someone's lives around to putting them into housing and having that safety of their own housing and having the right level of support as well. So just that we find that really important to break that kind of cycle of homelessness. We recognise that people who, who've done their time need access to safe housing.
Thanks. Yes, Lisa.
I could just add, we know from working with people with mental health substance use is a reference from a supportive housing environment is really looked on favorably by a landlord in market housing, so that time in a housing facility like these, and then the reference from a reputable provider is a very powerful opportunity for market housing that doesn't exist for people often without that.
Right, okay.
And perhaps what the other piece we'll emphasize is, again, it's not different from what's in communities now. There are individuals who are, that may be on probation or, may have a drunk driving charge or all those sort of things that will give you a criminal record, possession of marijuana, which is now you're allowed to have it, all those sort of things. So it's just a reflection of what our community is now. So, it's not,
Yep. Okay.
we're not creating a special place.
Okay, yeah. Treated the same as other buildings, I think is what you're saying. Okay, thank you. Okay, Anna.
Okay, we have a question about curfews. There have actually been a few questions, but this is recently asked. Why do you not have a curfew set for those who will be living in these two sites? And how will you protect residents living around Terminal Ave to make sure the homeless do not do damage to properties?
Okay, so let's start with the first question, which is around curfew. So will there be a curfew at either of these sites?
No, this is independent living. These are people's houses. They're free to come and go. I just want to put that out there. These are not jails. This is or any of that. This is about housing for individuals. It's about giving them respect and dignity. So there are no curfews.
Okay, yep.
As there wouldn't be in any other apartment building.
Likewise, Violet? Okay.
Absolutely.
And then the second part of the question was around what could be done to protect people's property? Was that, sorry?
Yeah, that question has been asked, but I think we have some new viewers who have joined us. So as far as maybe we can talk about.
So is it back to the security issue?
Yes, I think that might be it. Yeah.
I mean, again, we'll just reiterate that that people are coming. So I want to start from that core position, which is people are coming. This is their homes. They're choosing to be part of this. They're signing programs, agreements that they're as committed to making this work as others. That the services and that we're providing, whether it be food, whether it be the bedding with the supports that are in there, all of these are there to help set up and eliminate that need for if people are involved. Let's recognize that many people are working or they're binning and picking up. There's a variety of ways to earn income, and so ultimately, as we say, people stabilize. That's what this housing provides, an opportunity to stabilize. Yeah. We recognize that there are community concerns, and because of that, we're going to look at having security, and part of that is going to be feeding back into these community advisory committees of how's it working, what do we need to do, what are we seeing, so we have an opportunity to respond. But so we're responding to communities' concerns by providing that outside security.
And there will be a 24-hour phone number that can be phoned to reach the site, and the staff will be there 24/7 and will be able to answer it. And as Dominic had mentioned earlier, there will be that security for the initial few months until it's decided that it's not needed anymore, and I have full confidence that that will happen. But yeah, so.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a number that people can reach, so there's some feeling, the sense of accountability there. If there's an issue, it can be addressed right away at the building, and then those concerns.
And I want to be clear. I mean, if it's a minor concern, give us a call. But if there's some stranger in your backyard, phone the police.
Right.
We're not coming.
It may not be from your building. Yeah.
Phone the police first. And 99.9% of the time, it's not our guys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
We have a question about how Nanaimo and all of us are addressing seniors' homelessness.
Oh, okay. So we've talked a little bit already this evening, just briefly, about how some of the folks in the tent city are seniors. Did you want to elaborate on that?
Sure, and definitely it's something that we've seen in Samaritan House, is that we're seeing a much higher number of women over the age of 50, 55. We even are seeing women in their 70s and 80s. So we are in a crisis in Nanaimo, and we are addressing it. Quite a few of the people that will be coming into these houses, these buildings, will be seniors, and there is some seniors housing coming, being planned for the very near future. So it is an issue, and yes, the sooner we can address it, the better.
And through outreach, with our outreach connecting with some of those seniors, they may find there's opportunity that they can access, say, for the rent supplements in the market or other options. They may not, some of the seniors may not even be connected to OAC, so it's really important that we recognize the value of having those outreach connecting with the folks either at the shelter or if they're coming across them in encampments.
Yeah, thank you. Dale, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I don't want to give the impression that the only two projects going on in the community right
Yeah.
now are the temporary housing projects. So there's a number of projects, and BC Housing's behind many of them, and a couple are specifically for seniors. So if people are watching from Nanaimo, they know the project on Butter Tubs Marsh, for example, is a significant investment in the community for additional seniors units. We have another project in our downtown core, and there's other projects underway for affordable rental projects. So there's a number of buildings that are going through our permitting process as we speak.
Okay, good, thank you. And is there more information perhaps available on the city's website about those projects if you're to?
Absolutely. If anybody's interested in, a little plug here for our website, but if you're interested in any development in the community, we have what's called What's Building in My Neighborhood. And people are welcome to come on and then get information about any project in the city.
Great. And then again, I imagine the resource for the projects that BC Housing has underway would be available through the Let's Talk, perhaps in the document library or...
Absolutely, and also, of course, on our BC Housing page, bchousing.org, you can find information about Building BC, the Community Housing Fund, and other initiatives to build housing across the spectrum of housing throughout the province.
Okay.
Next question. Hello, how many permanent full-time staff will there be? What are their roles, and what will their salaries be?
And if you'd like to apply.
Well, our wages are all accessible through the BCGEU website because we're unionised, so that's easy for people to look up. I don't know off the top of my head.
Sure.
But full-time staff, I can't calculate it that quickly, but we've got...
I think we're going what, 25 to 30 at each site.
Yes,
We
not all
recognize-
full-time, but some of them, yeah.
You know, could be, I mean, we're looking at 3 people, 4 people, 24/7. You start doing the math on that quickly. You get to 16. Then you throw in a couple of cooks. You got some janitors. You got some maintenance. You got outreach workers.
Casuals.
I mean, this is a significant investment in the community, frankly. It was so cool. Now I'm getting excited. But it was so cool. You know, we hired 25 people, I think, and watching them, meeting with them yesterday, they're all excited about this opportunity and for them. And so it's an investment in the people that live in the community, and they're excited about being able to help the individuals that need housing. And so it's pretty fun.
It is, yeah. People are really on board for seeing this way of helping, and
Right. Okay. Thank you. All right. What's up next?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just catching up here. Many similar questions are being asked, but I think there's an older question about the continuum of care and what kind of healthcare services will be offered to the tenants of these 2 sites.
Okay.
So I'm really excited. I'm going to look to Island Health to answer this, but we know that we're setting up a room where there's an opportunity for Island Health service providers to come in and work with the tenants.
Yep.
So an on-site space.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think depending, really we need to find out first what people's health needs are. We certainly know that once people stabilize in housing, they become really open and ready to look at their mental health issues, whether it's trauma, whether it's substance use, whether it's counseling for anxiety and depression or relationship skills, all of that. So all different services that would help work with people. On those, they may have a significant and sort of long-term mental health challenge, so that's a different program that would support along with the site staff. But then there's also what we know is a huge need for primary care. So nurse practitioner, general practitioner, getting people attached to a provider, getting those physical health needs looked at and supported. What we know is particularly that senior population has significant physical health needs, prescriptions, coverage, pharmacy, you name it. So really It depends, but even at the encampment, we had physicians coming forward saying they wanted to work in the encampment. So I think it becomes an opportunity for lots of services to come together and look at what people need and get them connected.
Thank you. Dominic, you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think this is one of the exciting opportunities that supportive housing provides. Because when we talk about people who are home, or addressing homelessness, it can only be done through the partnership approach. And you know, not one agency can solve homelessness on its own. So it's a partnership between BC Housing, our non-profit providers, the city, and Island Health as well. That's how, you know, we're really going to get and address homelessness, because I think this is where supportive housing really just makes a difference. Because what normally happens if you're living on the street, it means you're actually accessing health services at the ER. And so, you know, besides the human kind of cost to homelessness, the financial cost is huge, because it's the cost of first responders, it's the cost of the healthcare system, particularly through ER, and then it's the cost particularly to municipalities through policing, through bylaw, etc. So one of the most cost-effective ways to really address homelessness is through supportive housing.
Thank you. Clarification.
So we're going to take one more 5-minute break before the end. We are going to 8:30. So one more question before we throw to the break. What can individuals in the neighborhood do to be involved in making this the right solution?
Well, I've been very excited by the group Friends of 250 who have come forward, and they are putting together, they've got a GoFundMe page, and they've raised quite a bit of money. They're putting together packages, welcome packages for all the residents. And when they got as much money as they got, they said, well, who's doing something for the Labio site? And I said, I don't know, you can contact them. So they found out that there isn't a group around there. So now they're doing welcome packages for both sites. So we're really excited about that. And then moving into the future, we're looking forward to having the community involved in some way. Volunteering, we're hoping to do community gardens, and I think the Pacifica is planning that as well. So it's a great opportunity to get involved.
Yeah, and part of our most recent community consultations, there is this group of lovely seniors who came forward, and they want to help set up with the community gardens and make that happen. That's pretty fantastic. Other people, opportunity, as our clients are ready, as the tenants are ready, for them to come down and volunteer at I think it's called Foods and Fishes, or I mean, there's an opportunity for all of that. So it is part of that welcoming of that community, and part of our people becoming part of the community. So, I mean, don't come running in the first week. We got to get set up and do that stuff, but there's going to be wonderful opportunities. But, maybe that's a small shameless plug, which we'll all put in, which is, Christmas is coming. This is a time where it is a time of second chances, and an opportunity, whether it be welcoming packages, whether it just be small gifts that help people start to celebrate and bring Christmas back into their lives.
There's even a card that was designed, and so they have a very specific card that someone designed, and they're going to handwrite these welcome cards to everyone that's moving in. So
there's good people in the city of Nanaimo, and we've been really excited to meet them continually.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think on that note, we'll take a 5-minute break. Please do keep those questions coming in. We want to hear from you, and we'll have a little bit of time after the break to come back to those questions. And as we said before, if your question wasn't answered this evening, you will find its response posted on the Let's Talk site within the next day or so, I think. And we'll come back in about 5 minutes. Thanks. Okay, welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. We're into the final part of our session this evening, and we've looked at some of the questions that are coming in, and it looks like for the most part we've covered most of those questions off, and we will be presenting all the questions and answers on the Let's Talk site in the coming days. And so what we'd like to do right now is go across our panelists and really find out from them what's sort of one thing that you think our audience and the viewers in Nanaimo really need to know about the supportive housing, and what kind of comes to mind as an important thing that they can take away and think about as we get ready to have the supportive housing opening up? Dominic, is that something that puts you on the spot?
Yeah, so I always come back to something that was said to me last year by a person who lived in another tent city, and this older person, and he was well into his 60s, and we talked about his life in the tent city, and we talked about coming inside and being housed, because he said something which has stayed with me ever since, which is, it's so hard to make a positive change in your life when you're living in a tent. And I think that's what I certainly kind of hang on to, because I think, let's not forget, this is about people's homes. It's about people who are being homeless and coming inside and having that opportunity and that sense of hope and dignity back in their lives again. And that kind of really stayed with me. Just the opportunities and the chances that come when you have a house and a home.
Yeah, a place that's safe and
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Dean, what's one thing that you're sort of thinking of that's really important for people to understand?
Well, I mean, we've been talking tonight about the two sites, and a lot of the work we've done as supportive providers is try to think about what could go on, how do we make these projects successful, and they're successful. Like, we're dedicated to success. With BC Housing, you know, we need to make sure that it works for the city. It needs to make sure it works, and for the client, it needs to make sure it works. What I want to put out is, and I hope we haven't made it sound like it's going to be perfect. You know what I mean? Like, these are people, and we recognize that that they face some challenges, and we're really looking to do that. And I think what really struck me was that we understand that this is a process, that people are going to work together, that these community advisory, not committees, councils, is an opportunity for people, like so in Bevan Park, with the sports groups, with the equestrian groups, with individuals around there, the public works yard. We want to have this so we can hear from people, we can adjust, we can know what's going on, and so we can address issues while they're small, and so they don't become a big community issue. And frankly, how we can reach out. So I just want to encourage people to understand. I hope we haven't painted this to be too rosy, because there's things we think we've thought of everything, but we want to continue to hearing from you. The community advisory committees is a way to do that, and recognize that that's a way for all of us to sort of continue to build our communities and welcome these people into our communities and make it successful. So I just want to ensure that people know that this is a dialogue that continues, and tonight is just a part of that.
Thank you. How about you, Violet? What's one thing you hope people will take away from our discussion this evening?
I think for me, it comes down to why I do what I do. I mean, this has been a whirlwind of coming together and working together to try and come up with a solution. And this is not the whole solution, but this is definitely a good start. And I just want to bring it back to the people. The reason I do what I do is because of the people. And we have so many amazing stories of people whose lives have been changed just by giving that little bit of support. Trauma happens, we hear stories of childhood abuse, and then their life starts spiraling. And who am I to judge why they made some of those decisions they made? So that's what it comes down to for me, and we have this wonderful opportunity to be successful in changing lives. And so that's what I would say to everyone that's listening. And I know some people have some really strong opinions on, you know, that what we're doing is not right, that we're condoning or any of those things. And I just want to say that we have the best interests of the people that we're serving, and we really want to see them succeed. And so that's why we do what we do, and I hope that we'll have a lot of community support to do that. So thank you.
Heidi.
Wow, what do you say with all these great statements? A lot of pressure, but it really, for me, it just really comes back to the partnerships. We couldn't come forward with these housing opportunities for these very vulnerable people. And I'm not just talking about the folks that we know are in Tent City. When I got up this morning and heard the wind and the rain and looked out, there was somebody in the doorway that was cold, and I thought, oh, we have to do more. And only through the partnerships with the city and our nonprofit operators and Island Health can we do that. So it's just really about working together, and we've still got more work to do, but I feel like there's great commitment to be able to serve those folks.
Thanks, Heidi. Lisa.
Yeah, I think I would just add really learning the importance of also partnering with communities and ensuring that, as people have said, we really hear the community concerns, we believe the community concerns, and we act on them so that we can be good neighbors and accepted and even welcomed, and so that people can believe that we're committed to doing a really good job in not causing harm, but working in partnership with people, and I think that's in the best interest of our clients as well. Yeah.
Dale, last thought for you.
I guess maybe there's a couple things that come to mind, and I said it earlier, and I think I don't want to miss the fact that this is the only type of housing that we're focusing on in the community, and there's this need across this continuum of housing that's important, and there are projects that are ongoing right now to try to meet that cross section. The other part I think that's important is, and somebody mentioned it here earlier tonight, is the cost of doing nothing at times, right? And there's real cost to all of us, and there's certainly cost to the local government, to the city, of having people that are homeless, and a cost to maintaining our level of service in that kind of environment. And one of the best things we can do is to get people into homes.
Great. Thank you for that, and we put you on the spot, but it was really interesting to hear all of your different perspectives, so thank you for sharing those insights. And Anna.
Yes, so there's, I've had one person ask if everybody could just please introduce themselves again and where they're from. That could be a way of perhaps wrapping up. Before we do, though, I do want to remind everybody that our online Q&A will be open until November 30th, and we also have a series of community dialogue sessions happening in Nanaimo through to November 29th. There's 6 more sessions. I do believe that there's still room for them. This is an opportunity for you to meet with people in person and ask your questions, and you can find that information on the Let's Talk Housing BC site, where I would assume that you still are now watching this. So you can attend the event in person. The information is on the site in the top right-hand corner of your screen. And you can also find more information in our document library, and we will continue to populate this page regarding the Nanaimo supportive housing with more information as it comes along. We will get to all of your answers as soon as possible. And over beside me here is Kim, who has been transcribing for the night, and so it will just be a little bit of organization. So please know that we will answer all questions, even the questions we didn't get to tonight. And thank you so much for tuning in on behalf of BC Housing. And perhaps we could just end by everybody giving their names and their titles and say good night.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
I'm Diana Bully, and I'm an independent facilitator with Idea Space.
Thank you, and I'm Dominic Flanagan. I'm the Executive Director for Strategic Initiatives at BC Housing.
My name is Dean Fortin. I'm the Executive Director at Pacifica Housing. Thank you very much for being with us tonight, and thank you for this opportunity.
I'm Violet Hayes. I'm the Executive Director with Island Crisis Care Society.
Heidi Hartman, Director of Operations, BC Housing.
Lisa Murphy, Director of Mental Health Substance Use, Island Health.
My name is Dale Lindsay. I'm Director of Community Development with the City of Nanaimo.
Great, thank you. And so I think with that, we'll bid you farewell. And again, please feel free to keep your questions and answers, not your answers, but your questions coming in until November 30th, where we'll be happy to post those answers up online, and you'll be able to see all of the questions and answers that have come in over the past few days and during the session this evening. Thank you, and good night.